Hello everyone, Joel here. Are you tired of dropping $70 on a quadruple A game just to get a buggy mess filled with microtransactions? Yeah, same. Today, we're diving into the sweet spot of gaming, the glorious AA space. These titles pack more passion, heart, and actual fun gameplay than most of the bloated corporate AAA slop.
I'm not reaching the astropathic relay station. The source of the interference lies in Heretic.
Let's kick things off with a game that practically screams for the Emperor. Saber Interactive essentially grabbed the bloated AAA industry by the collar and showed them how to make a pure, unadulterated power fantasy. The combat feels incredibly meaty. Every chainsword swing shreds Tyrannid swarms with the kind of glorious, gory feedback we haven't seen in years. Now, objectively speaking, the campaign is on the shorter side, and the combat loop can get a little repetitive if you aren't diving into the co-op missions. But honestly, when the game lets you operate as a 2-ton walking tank turning Xenos into absolute puree, it's easy to overlook. It's an old-school, unapologetic action ROM that makes modern live service shooters look like a joke.
Subterranean too.
Moving right along from hulking Space Marines, there is a game that will humble players faster than a From Software tutorial boss. Slowclap designed a combat mechanic so buttery smooth and rhythmic that successfully clearing a room without getting touched makes you look exactly like John Wick. However, the difficulty curve here is an absolute brick wall, and the mechanic of aging every time you die means your character will probably look like Gandalf by level 2. It's aggressively punishing, and the overall runtime is quite short once mastered, but locking down that parry system and flowing through a nightclub of thugs delivers a high that bloated 200-hour open-world games could only dream of achieving.
No!
If I'm getting this right, first.
Speaking of rhythm, let's talk about the vibrant, toe-tapping masterpiece that is Hi-Fi Rush. Tango Gameworks dropped this absolute banger out of nowhere, proving that you don't need a massive marketing campaign to deliver pure joy. The genius here is how the hack-and-slash mechanics sync perfectly to the beat, making the combat flow like a musical prodigy, even if the player has the rhythm of a sea sponge. Sure, the level design is undeniably linear, and fighting the exact same robot enemies gets a bit old toward the final acts. But frankly, with Krafton famously swooping in to save the studio after Microsoft unceremoniously shut them down, playing this gem feels like a monumental victory lap for creative AA gaming over corporate nonsense.
Fresh fish from outriver. Caught this morning.
Now for something a bit more grounded, grab a torch because it's time to wade through the rat-infested nightmare of the A Plague Tale series. Asobo Studio crafted a narrative-driven stealth adventure that easily goes toe-to-toe with Sony's biggest cinematic blockbusters. The emotional weight of Amicia and Hugo's journey is devastatingly beautiful, and the puzzle-solving mechanics using light to part literal oceans of rats are incredibly tense. On the downside, the stealth sections can feel incredibly rigid and heavily scripted, and if you experience Requiem at launch, you definitely suffered through some painful 30 frames per second console lock stutters. Still, the gripping storytelling and breathtaking visuals punch so far above their AA weight class, it genuinely makes you wonder what AAA studios are doing with their billions.
Lucas, what is that thing?
I read about this. It's an elephant.
Alright, let's pivot to something fresh that recently took the world by storm. WUCHANG Fallen Feathers launched in July 2025 and absolutely shattered expectations, casually selling over 1 million copies by early 2026. This title drops players into a dark fantasy, Ming Dynasty setting that positively drips with atmosphere. The combat is heavily inspired by Sekiro and Bloodborne, offering lightning-fast strikes and a magic system that accommodates huge playstyle customization on the fly. Now, it definitely suffers from some classic Souls-like jank, and a few bosses have parry windows so tight they require the reflexes of a caffeinated ninja. But for an indie studio to drop a historical action RPG that plays this beautifully, it's a massive win. Before we go into the list, I want to give you my recommendation for some of the best deals in instant gaming right now, especially if you're tight on budget. We knew that instant gaming always give us so many crazy deals for your favorite games, like these titles for example. I mean, can you believe these prices? If you love RPGs, there's no way you never heard of these masterpieces, and to think that you can get them under $10 or even $5, it's an absolute steal. All you have to do is just click my link in the description below, start searching for your favorite games and use the activation code on your chosen platform. By using my link, you're not only saving tons of money, but also helping me to support this channel. Alright then, let's get back into the list. Of course, it's impossible to discuss legendary AA games without bowing down to Larian Studios and Divinity Original Sin 2. Before they took over the world with Baldur's Gate 3, they perfected the modern CRPG right here. The elemental combat system is just ridiculously fun. There's nothing quite like turning a battlefield into a toxic puddle and then setting it on fire with a single spell. Yes, the inventory management is a certified nightmare that causes minor panic attacks, and the game's final acts definitively suffer from noticeable pacing and scaling issues. Yet, the sheer amount of player freedom and deep, hilarious role-playing interactions makes most AAA RPGs feel like they're holding your hand through a kiddie pool. Now, if CRPG menus sound too slow, let's inject some pure adrenaline with Evil West. Flying Wild Hog basically asked, what if we mixed cowboys with vampires and gave the protagonist a lightning gauntlet? The result is a delightfully aggressive beat-em-up that plays like a Lost Piece 2 classic in the best way possible, juggling monsters, slamming them into spike traps, and blasting them with revolvers creates a wonderfully bloody loop. Admittedly, the game is strictly linear to a fault, and the exact same glowing weak point mini-bosses are recycled more times than anyone can count. But in an era where every major publisher tries to force an 80-hour lifestyle commitment, this 10-hour focused carnival of carnage is an absolute breath of fresh air.
A few months ago was filled with joy and hope, is now a place of fear and suspicion.
Switching gears entirely, let's look at the ultimate mercenary simulator, Jagged Alliance 3. Hemimont Games brought this dormant franchise back from the dead, perfectly capturing that cheesy 80s action movie vibe while delivering deep, strategic turn-based combat. The hit mechanics and weapon customization are insanely satisfying, forcing players to think 3 steps ahead before breaching a compound. On the flip side, the user interface is aggressively clunky and the learning curve is essentially a sheer cliff for newcomers. Plus, the humor is an acquired taste that borders on cringe, but once that steep entry barrier is crossed, it offers a tactical sandbox experience that completely dunks on the watered-down strategy games pushed out by the big boys.
I have the villain in my sights.
And hey, for those who prefer their strategy mixed with a heavy dose of radioactive dread, Chernobylite perfectly fills that void. The Farm 51 built a sci-fi survival horror RPG that utilized physical 3D scans of the real-world exclusion zone to deliver unparalleled atmosphere. Scavenging for supplies while dodging supernatural anomalies and hostile soldiers creates an incredible loop of tension and reward. However, the base building mechanics often feel disconnected from the main narrative, and the gunplay itself is undeniably stiff compared to traditional shooters. The English voice acting is also pretty rough, making the native Russian track practically mandatory. Despite those rough edges, the branching narrative and haunting vibe deliver an experience far more immersive than most big-budget shooters. Next up is a brawler that just dropped last year and has been making players rage quit in the best way possible, the first Berserker Khazan. Neopol took the dungeon and fighter universe and turned it into a hardcore cel-shaded action RPG that looks like a playable anime fever dream. The combat is aggressively fast, focusing heavily on continuous offensive pressure and devastating combo chains. Fair warning though, the stamina management is incredibly unforgiving, and the world design is surprisingly linear, lacking the deep exploration usually expected from the genre. It will absolutely crush anyone who tries to just button mash, but when a perfect combo is finally executed to style on a boss, this AA gem reveals more mechanical depth than most AAA slashers on the market. Speaking of stylish action, it is impossible to ignore Stellar Blade. Shift Up delivered a visually stunning spectacle that flawlessly blurs the line between high-end AA and massive AAA. The combat is phenomenal, blending slick dodging and pairing with flashy, over-the-top execution animations that simply never get old. The world design is also surprisingly dense and rewarding to explore. However, it must be pointed out that the platforming sections are genuinely atrocious, constantly feeling like steering a shopping cart on ice. Furthermore, the story and English voice acting are completely forgettable, bordering on totally generic. But honestly, the immaculate boss fights and gorgeous art direction outshine games with triple the budget, making the narrative flaws extremely easy to forgive. If slick action is the goal, but with a much darker gothic twist, Lies of P is a total must-play. Round 8 Studio somehow managed to create a Bloodborne-inspired Pinocchio game that actually rocks. The weapon crafting system, where a massive buzzsaw can be slapped onto a rapier handle, is pure genius, and the steampunk aesthetic is flawless. That being said, the parry window is notoriously tight, making some encounters feel more frustrating than fair, and a few of the late-game bosses are absurdly spongy. The exploration is also noticeably linear compared to From Software's labyrinthine worlds. But the sheer polish, buttery performance, and gripping grim-dark story prove that mid-sized studios can absolutely conquer the Souls-like genre without missing a beat.
Adventure. If that's what it is, your blood should soon start flowing again, my friend. And when we've dealt with that band...
Now let's trade the mechanical puppets for some hardcore medieval realism with the Kingdom Come Deliverance series. Warhorse Studios basically said no magic, no dragons, just historical accuracy and muddy peasants. And the result is brilliant. The dedication to immersion is unmatched, and with the phenomenal sequel dropping in last year and rightfully snatching up narrative awards left and right, the franchise is at its absolute peak. Granted, the directional combat system is undeniably clunky, especially when dealing with multiple enemies, and locking on can be a nightmare. Plus, early lockpicking mechanics are infamous for making players want to smash their keyboards. But there is simply no other RPGs on the market that simulates rising through the medieval ranks, quite like this masterpiece.
Sacred technology breaks my heart, figuratively speaking.
Let's take it back to the grim darkness of the far future with Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. Owlcat Games translated the sprawling tabletop universe into an epic isometric CRPG where every choice carries the weight of billions of lives. The turn-based tactical combat is incredibly deep, and the sheer narrative freedom to be a loyal servant or a heretical tyrant is staggering. Of course, being an Owlcat title, it launched with a healthy dose of Eurojank, meaning the late-game acts were notoriously buggy, and the pacing drags significantly around the middle chapters. Regardless of those technical hiccups, the sheer ambition and staggering amount of lore make it a far better and richer experience than most watered-down AAA sci-fi games available today.
Pain cleanses the body.
Finally, we arrive at the absolute crown jewel that released in April 2025, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Sandfall Interactive delivered a breathtaking turn-based RPG that genuinely functions as a love letter to the classics while injecting innovative real-time reaction mechanics. Visually, it is jaw-dropping, running beautifully on Unreal Engine 5, and it's no wonder it easily secured an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam. Now, having to constantly nail real-time button prompts during turn-based combat can definitely get exhausting during long gaming sessions, and the PC performance will stutter if it isn't running on a high-end SSD. But the mesmerizing art style, gripping story, and addictive combat loop make this game an absolute triumph. It is the perfect reminder that the AA industry is the true beating heart of gaming right now.